"Don't touch that paper." Daniel Mercer's voice cut through the little church just as Ethan Brooks's dusty fingers hovered above the old piano keys. Beside him, 8-year-old Lily lifted a yellowed sheet of music onto the stand with both hands, careful as if it were a butterfly. Ethan pressed 3 soft notes. At the back pew, Eleanor Whitmore rose so suddenly her wedding ring struck the wood. "Daddy," Lily whispered. "The paper says her name." Daniel stepped forward, smiling too tightly. "That belongs in my office." 3 hours earlier, the piano had not looked like a miracle. It looked like something already sentenced. A white disposal tag hung from its cracked side panel, swinging whenever the church doors breathed cold November air into the sanctuary. The words were written in black marker, blocky and final. Disposal. Remove before sale event. Ethan stood before it in his worn flannel shirt, tool belt low on his hips, sawdust still caught in the seams of his boots from a morning porch repair across town. Lily stood close behind him, holding a soft cloth and watching the adults the way children do when they know the room is not safe but no one has said so. The sanctuary smelled of lemon oil, old hymnals, floor wax, and rain-soaked wool. Yellow light poured from the chandeliers, warm but tired, falling across folding tables covered in donation jars and homemade pies. Near the front, Daniel Mercer moved between board members with a clipboard pressed against his chest. His voice polished, patient, almost pastoral. "We all love tradition," he said, glancing at the piano. "But sentiment cannot pay a roof bill." A few people nodded. One man in a navy blazer looked Ethan up and down and whispered something that made the woman beside him hide a smile behind her paper cup. Ethan heard it. He did not answer. He walked to the piano, knelt beside the front leg, and ran his thumb along a crack in the wood. The damage was ugly, but not fatal. The pedal rod was bent. 2 hammers were stuck. 3 keys had sunk lower than the others, like tired teeth in an old mouth. "Mr. Brooks," Daniel said, pleasant enough for everyone to hear, "we appreciate your willingness, but this is not a church bench. It's an instrument, a very old one." Ethan kept his hand on the wood. Old doesn't mean finished. The room quieted just a little, not out of respect yet, but surprise. Pastor Thomas Avery, gray-haired and stooped from years of carrying other people's grief, stepped closer with an envelope in his hand. "Ethan, I can give you something for your time." Ethan looked at the envelope, then at the donation table where a handwritten sign read Sunday Meal Fund. He shook his head gently. "Keep it for the kitchen, Pastor." Lily looked up at him. "But Daddy," the truck light came on. He gave her a small smile, the kind meant to carry both truth and courage. "Then we'll drive home slow." Daniel's smile thinned. Behind him, the clipboard shifted in his hand, and Ethan noticed a second sheet beneath the church agenda. Only one line was visible before Daniel tucked it away. "Remove before buyer inspection. Remove before buyer inspection." Ethan did not look up when the words disappeared beneath Daniel Mercer's clipboard, but he felt them settle in the room like dust no one wanted to admit was there. Buyer. Not donor. Not contractor. Buyer. Daniel cleared his throat, turned his smile toward the board, and said, "We need to be careful about liability." The word landed harder than an accusation because it sounded so reasonable. Ethan tightened one loose screw by hand, slow enough not to scratch the old walnut. Lily held the cloth against her chest and watched Daniel's polished shoes stop just inches from her father's work boots. The shoes had no mud on them. Ethan's boots carried sawdust, rain, and the faint gray powder of honest labor. "Mr. Brooks," Daniel said, "I'm sure you're good with porches and fences." A small laugh slipped from the refreshment table. "This is different." Ethan nodded once. "It is. Then you understand." "I understand broken things need patience." The laugh died, but not because anyone had changed their mind. They were only waiting to see whether the poor carpenter would embarrass himself. The old sanctuary hummed with fluorescent ballast from the side hallway, a dry electric buzz under the softer sounds of coffee cups, rain ticking against stained glass, and folding chairs scraping the floor. A woman from the finance committee leaned toward another and whispered, "Does he even have insurance?" Another man murmured, "If he breaks it worse, who pays?" Lily heard that one. Her fingers tightened around the cloth until the corner twisted white. Ethan reached back without looking and touched 2 fingers gently to her sleeve. Not to silence her, not to shame her, just to remind her he was still there. Daniel saw the gesture and softened his voice in the way powerful men do when they want cruelty to look like concern. "No one wants to make this uncomfortable for your little girl," he said. "But the church has obligations." Pastor Avery's face tightened. Eleanor Whitmore, seated alone near the last pew in a dark wool coat, lifted her eyes. She had been quiet all morning, one gloved hand resting over her wedding ring, watching more than participating. She did not know Ethan. She did not trust him. But something in Daniel's tone made her thumb pause against the gold band. Ethan stood slowly, not tall in a dramatic way, not defiant, just steady. "Then write it down," he said. Daniel blinked. "Excuse me? Write down what condition it's in before I touch anything. Take pictures. Have Pastor Avery witness it. If it can't be helped, I'll say so." Daniel smiled again, but this time it came a second late. "That won't be necessary. It protects the church," Ethan said. "And it protects the truth." The room went thin and quiet. Outside, a car passed through a puddle, its tires hissing against the curb. Daniel tapped his pen on the clipboard, once, twice, then turned toward the finance table. "Fine. 90 minutes. But if this instrument becomes unusable during tonight's event, I need everyone here to understand that responsibility will not fall on the board." There it was, dressed in procedure, polished like mercy. The blame already waiting for Ethan before he had even opened his toolbox. Lily looked at the disposal tag still swinging from the piano side. Eleanor looked at Daniel's clipboard. And Ethan, kneeling again, noticed that beneath the top sheet, the hidden line did not say remove after inspection. It said remove before buyer inspection. Ethan read the hidden line one more time without moving his lips, then lowered his eyes to the piano as if the wood itself deserved more respect than the paper trying to condemn it. Remove before buyer inspection. The phrase kept its place in his mind while Daniel Mercer returned to the refreshment table, already speaking softly to 2 board members as though 90 minutes were an act of charity he had personally granted. Ethan did not chase him. He did not ask who the buyer was. He simply opened his old toolbox on the floor, spread a clean towel beside the pedals, and began taking photographs with Pastor Avery's phone before he touched another screw. "This side panel is cracked before repair," he said quietly. "Pedal rod bent before repair. 3 keys stuck before repair." Pastor Avery repeated each note into the phone's video, his tired voice catching the details like a witness who had been waiting too long to be useful. Lily crouched beside the bench, careful not to put her knees on the dusty floor in her church dress. "Daddy, why are we taking pictures of broken parts?" Ethan loosened a hinge with a short twist of his wrist. "Because truth gets easier to protect when you don't wait until people start arguing." Lily nodded as if she understood half of it and trusted the other half because it came from him. The sanctuary moved around them in little dismissive sounds. Spoons tapping paper plates, whispers pressed into coffee cups, rainwater dripping from umbrellas near the vestibule. Daniel glanced over once and gave a faint smile, the kind that said a man wasting time on carefulness had already lost. To him, Ethan's patience looked like weakness. To Ethan, it was the only way not to become what the room expected him to be. He removed the front panel and set each screw in a straight line on the towel. The smell inside the piano was old dust, dry felt, faint mouse droppings, and cedar, the strange, holy scent of something forgotten but not dead. 2 hammers had swollen from damp air. Pedal spring had slipped out of place. Under the left leg, someone had shoved a folded church bulletin years ago to stop the wobble, and Ethan replaced it with a trimmed piece of pine from his own scrap pouch. No one thanked him. No one noticed that the small repair kept the whole frame from twisting. Lily noticed his fingers, though, how they slowed near the cracked walnut, how he worked around the damage instead of forcing it. "Mom used to say you fixed things like you were apologizing to them," she said softly. Ethan paused for less than a breath. The mention of his late wife moved through him without display, like a shadow crossing warm light. "Your mom knew better than most," he said, then went back to the hinge. At the rear of the piano, his rag caught on something that did not feel like wood. He leaned closer. A strip of deep green velvet was wedged behind the soundboard, too cleanly placed to be debris, too intentional to be decoration. Ethan touched it once with the back of his finger, then stopped. Across the sanctuary, Eleanor Whitmore had risen halfway from her pew without knowing she had done it. Her face remained guarded, but her eyes had narrowed on Ethan's hand, not with trust yet, not even with hope, only with the unease of seeing a stranger treat an old secret more gently than the people paid to protect it. Daniel saw her looking and stepped between her and the piano, still smiling, still polished. "Just routine dust, I'm sure," he said. Ethan did not pull the velvet free. He placed Pastor Avery's phone closer, angled the camera toward the narrow opening, and whispered, "Pastor, I think this piano has a little door." Pastor Avery's phone made a small chirp as the camera adjusted to the darker space behind the soundboard, and that tiny sound seemed to offend Daniel Mercer more than the discovery itself. "Let's not turn this into a spectacle," Daniel said, stepping closer with both palms open, the same gesture he used when calming nervous donors. "Old instruments have all kinds of hollow spaces, dust pockets, repair gaps. Nothing unusual." Ethan kept one hand resting on the piano's rim and the other open at his side, away from the velvet, so no one could say he had pulled, planted, or hidden anything. Lily, still crouched near the bench, leaned just enough to see the green cloth without touching it. "It looks like my dollhouse door," she whispered. A few board members exchanged glances. One man in the navy blazer gave a tired little laugh. "Are we really stopping a fundraiser over a child's imagination?" Ethan turned his head slowly, not offended, only careful. "She didn't say what it was," he said. "She said what it looked like." That made the room slow down. Not stop, not yet, but slow, the way a room does when a plain sentence lands cleaner than an argument. Daniel's smile stayed in place, but a muscle moved at the corner of his jaw. Eleanor Whitmore remained half-standing in the last pew, her gloved hand gripping the rail in front of her. She had no reason to trust Ethan Brooks. A man with a toolbox could damage a relic as easily as restore it. A desperate father could misunderstand what he found. A child could mistake trash for treasure. All of that was reasonable, but Daniel's eagerness to move the matter away from the piano was not. Ethan looked toward Pastor Avery. "May I use your letter opener?" The old pastor blinked. "My what?" "The dull one on your desk. Not a knife. Something flat." Daniel gave a soft chuckle. "Mr. Brooks, this is exactly why we have procedures." "Then let's have them," Ethan said. "Two witnesses. Camera on. Nobody reaches inside except where everyone can see." Pastor Avery hesitated, then nodded and walked toward the side office. The sanctuary filled with a brittle waiting silence. Rain ticked harder against the stained glass. Somewhere near the back, the coffee urn clicked off with a dull metallic pop. Lily reached for Ethan's sleeve, not scared enough to cry, but close enough to remind him she was still 8. He bent down. "Stay by the bench, sweetheart." "I won't touch it," she said. "I know." When Pastor Avery returned, Ethan slid the dull opener along the edge of the green velvet. A narrow wooden lip lifted with a dry whisper. Not a crack, not a repair gap, a fitted compartment. Inside lay a yellowed sheet of music folded around a sealed envelope. The wax seal was cracked at one edge but still visible, stamped with a small W inside a wreath. Daniel moved first. "That needs to be secured. In my office." Ethan did not pick it up. He did not let Lily reach for it. He looked at Pastor Avery's phone, then at the two board members closest to the piano. "You all saw where it came from." Eleanor's breath caught when the light touched the handwriting on the top fold. The letters were faded but elegant, the ink browned with age. For Eleanor, when the church forgets. Her thumb stopped moving over her wedding ring. Daniel extended his hand, still courteous, still controlled. "I'll take the envelope now." Ethan looked at him. I didn't say there was an envelope. The words were quiet, almost gentle, but the effect moved through the sanctuary like cold air under a locked door. Daniel's hand hung there 1 second too long before he lowered it. I can see it from here, he said smoothly. It was a reasonable answer. Too reasonable. Because from where Daniel stood, the folded music covered most of the seal, and the word supplement was facing down, hidden against the towel. Ethan shifted the edge of the paper into the chandelier light without opening it, and there, on the back of the envelope, faint but unmistakable, were the words Supplement B, Preservation Fund. Supplement B, Preservation Fund. The words sat in the chandelier light with the strange weight of something that had waited years to be seen, but Ethan did not open the envelope. He only set the folded music and sealed paper on the clean towel, then moved his hands away. Daniel Mercer exhaled through his nose, soft enough to seem patient, sharp enough for Ethan to hear. This is exactly how misunderstandings start, Daniel said. Old paper, emotional people, too many eyes. Ethan looked toward Pastor Avery. Then let's keep the eyes on it. The old pastor nodded, his phone still recording from the end of the piano. What do you need, son? Nothing from the envelope, Ethan said. Just the piano. Daniel's brows lifted. The piano? You asked whether it could be used tonight. Ethan turned back to the keys. Let's answer that first. It was a modest test, almost too small for a room suddenly hungry for a larger truth. No dramatic speech. No claim that he understood legal documents. Just a carpenter, with dust on his sleeves, listening to wood and wire. He pressed middle C. The note came out flat and tired, like a voice waking after a long illness. He adjusted the stuck hammer with the dull edge of his carving knife, not cutting, only easing felt from swollen wood. He pressed again. Cleaner. Then the pedal. Then the low keys. Lily stood beside the bench, both hands folded over the cloth, her face still worried but no longer shrinking. She could see her father doing what he always did when people misread him. Not proving himself loudly, just making the broken thing safer for everyone else. Don't play from that paper, Daniel said, still smiling for the room. It may confuse people. Ethan looked down at the sheet without touching the ink. I'm not performing. Good. I'm checking the sound. A chair stopped scraping near the refreshment table. The side hallway's fluorescent hum suddenly seemed louder. Eleanor Whitmore stood motionless in the back aisle, her gloved hand no longer over her ring but pressed against the top of the pew in front of her. She had not come forward. She had not defended Ethan. Yet when Daniel reached again toward the towel, her voice cut in quietly. Leave it where everyone can see it. Daniel turned. Mrs. Whitmore, I assure you. I said leave it. The name moved through a few board members like a match passed hand to hand. Whitmore. Ethan heard it but did not react. It meant nothing to him yet beyond the W on the seal and the pain in her voice. A draft slipped under the front doors, lifting the corner of the music. Lily caught it with one small hand before it could slide off the towel. Can I put it on the stand so it doesn't fall? She asked, looking first at Ethan, then Pastor Avery. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Only by the edges. Lily carried the sheet carefully, arms stiff with importance, and placed it on the piano's music stand. The faded notes faced Ethan now. He meant only to test 3 nearby keys. His eyes caught the first measure because it was there, simple and aching, written in a hand that seemed to press harder on some notes than others. He played 3 bars softly, barely above a whisper. The effect was immediate. Eleanor's breath broke. Her knees touched the pew, and the gold band on her finger tapped the wood once. Daniel's hand shot toward the small sound board where the church livestream tablet rested. Cut the audio, he murmured to a volunteer. Ethan stopped playing at once. Ma'am? He said, turning toward Eleanor, his voice low enough not to turn her grief into a scene. I didn't know this song belonged to anyone. Eleanor stared at the music as if the page had opened a door inside her that she had nailed shut years ago. Samuel wrote that, she whispered. He played it the night he asked me to marry him. No one had a copy. The room lost its appetite for whispers. Even the coffee urn seemed to go silent. Pastor Avery lowered the phone, then quickly lifted it again, remembering why it mattered. Across the piano, Daniel's polished face remained composed, but the volunteer beside the live stream tablet looked confused. "Sir," the young man said, "the camera's still rolling." It caught her pulling it from the piano. Daniel's smile froze for less than a second. Eleanor saw it. Ethan saw it too and said nothing, because the first proof had not solved the mystery. It had only shown that someone was already afraid of the record. The young volunteer's words hung above the piano longer than the music had. "The camera's still rolling." Caught her pulling it from the piano. Daniel Mercer turned his head slowly toward the live stream tablet, and for the first time all afternoon, his kindness arrived half a beat late. "Then preserve the footage," Eleanor Whitmore said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of authority that made people straighten without knowing why. "No one deletes anything." Daniel's lips parted. "Mrs. Whitmore, with respect, this is becoming emotionally charged." "It became emotionally charged," she said, "when my dead husband's private song came out of a piano you wanted removed." Ethan stood beside the bench, hands open, saying nothing. There was a part of him, small and wounded, that could have enjoyed watching Daniel struggle. But revenge was a fire that burned evidence first. So Ethan looked at Pastor Avery and said, "We should bag the music, the envelope, and the velvet separately. If this matters, it needs to matter clean." Eleanor turned toward him then, not warmly, not fully, but differently. A man trying to exploit the moment would have played the song again. Ethan had stopped at her pain. A man trying to win attention would have waved the envelope around. Ethan had moved his hands away. Rain slid down the stained glass in silver lines, blurring the saints into soft colors. The sanctuary smelled suddenly of damp coats and old paper. Pastor Avery brought 3 clear offering envelopes from the office, the closest thing the church had to evidence bags, and Ethan wrote the time on each one with a pencil from the hymnal rack. Music sheet, sealed envelope, green velvet strip. Eleanor watched the pencil move. Her eyes narrowed when the handwriting on the sheet caught the light again. "May I see the first line?" she asked. Ethan did not hand it to her. He lifted the clear sleeve and angled it beneath the chandelier so she could read without touching. Her gloved hand went to the inside pocket of her coat. From a leather billfold, she drew out a folded letter, the crease worn soft from years of being opened and closed when grief became too heavy to carry silently. "Samuel wrote this before we married," she said. No one breathed loudly. She placed the letter beside the sleeved music, not on top of it. The capital E in Eleanor curved backward at the same unusual angle on both pages, as if the writer's hand had hesitated before giving her name away. Pastor Avery leaned closer, his glasses sliding low on his nose. "That's his hand," he whispered. Daniel adjusted his tie. "Handwriting similarities are not legal proof." "No," Ethan said gently, "but they're reason not to hide it." The sentence struck Richard Hale just as he entered through the side door in a charcoal overcoat, shaking rain from his sleeves, though no one had seen Daniel call him. "Hide what?" Richard asked. "Too quick. Too smooth." Daniel's eyes flicked toward him, then away. Eleanor turned. "Richard, how did you know to come?" Hale gave a measured smile. "Daniel alerted me that an old document had been found. Naturally, anything marked Supplement B should be handled by counsel." The sanctuary went still in a way Ethan felt before he understood it. Supplement B had been facing down when Daniel first reached for it. Ethan had only turned the envelope afterward, under the chandelier light. Eleanor's hand settled flat on Samuel's old letter. Her grief did not vanish. It hardened into attention. Ethan could have accused them both right there. Instead, he slid Pastor Avery's phone, still showing the live stream file, beside the letter and the sealed envelope. "Then we shouldn't handle it privately," he said. Daniel's polished smile faded at the edges. Richard looked toward the camera, then toward Eleanor, and lowered his voice. "This conversation should continue in the office." But the music, the seal, the velvet, the letter, and the recording now lay together in the open, and everyone in that little church understood the same cold thing at once. This was no longer a misunderstanding that could be solved behind a closed door. The folding chairs had been turned toward the piano now, not the donation tables. Pastor Avery stood at the front of the sanctuary with his Bible closed in one hand and the church's old maintenance ledger in the other, as if even he understood that this meeting required truth before prayer. Rain tapped the stained glass behind him. The live-stream tablet sat on a music stand, its red recording glowing beside the sealed envelope, the sleeved music, the green velvet strip, Samuel Whitmore's letter, and Ethan Brooks's careful pencil notes. Ethan stood beside Lily near the front pew, his flannel sleeves rolled down again, his hands washed but still marked with pale dust in the cracks of his knuckles. He did not look like a man ready to win. He looked like a man ready to be blamed properly. Daniel Mercer faced the board with wounded patience. "Friends," he began, "we are losing sight of the mission. This church has a leaking roof, a failing kitchen, unpaid repairs, and a community depending on us. Selling and used property is not greed. It is stewardship." A few heads lowered. The word stewardship worked because it sounded like sacrifice. Richard Hale stepped forward next, voice smooth as polished stone. "And legally speaking, a sealed envelope found by a non-professional during unauthorized repair raises chain of custody concerns. Mr. Brooks may have meant well, but meaning well does not make evidence reliable." There it was, the cleanest version of the lie. Not that Ethan was wicked, only that he was too poor, too ordinary, too untrained to be trusted with truth. Lily slipped her fingers into her father's hand. Ethan squeezed once, then let go so she could stand behind Pastor Avery, safe and close. Eleanor Whitmore stood near the aisle, silent, watching both men the way grief watches a locked door. She had not announced who she was beyond her name. She had not rescued Ethan with authority. She waited. Ethan took one step forward and laid the first item on the piano bench. The sheet music was found inside the compartment before anyone opened it. Pastor Avery turned the tablet so the room could see the paused live-stream frame. Lily's small hands holding the music by its edges. Ethan's hands away. Daniel's several feet back. Daniel lifted his chin. A video shows discovery, not authenticity. "That's fair," Ethan said. "No anger. No trap. Just steadiness." He placed the second item down, the green velvet strip. Pastor Avery opened the maintenance ledger to a brittle page dated 1998. The ink faded but readable. Samuel Whitmore installed one-lined memory compartment in sanctuary piano, left rear soundboard access. The pastor read, voice trembling. Green velvet lining provided by SW. The room shifted. Someone stopped stirring sugar into coffee. Richard's jaw tightened, but he recovered. A maintenance note does not prove the contents remained untouched. "No," Ethan said, "but it proves the compartment wasn't mine." The sentence landed without pride. Eleanor's eyes moved from Ethan to Daniel. Daniel's smile held, but his fingers pressed too hard into the clipboard. "We all knew old work had been done on the piano," he said quickly. "That does not change our financial duty." Ethan looked at him then, calm enough to make the room lean in. "Then why did the disposal order say remove before buyer inspection?" Daniel's mouth opened. Richard stepped in before he could answer. "Standard language. Buyers inspect properties all the time." For a moment it almost worked. Procedure wrapped around the truth like fog. Then Lily, still behind Pastor Avery, pointed to the disposal tag hanging from the piano side and said in her small voice, "But the tag was already there before Daddy opened his tools." Pastor Avery turned the live stream back 10 minutes, then 20, to the first frame of Ethan kneeling beside the untouched piano. The tag was already swinging. The room saw it. Daniel's face did not collapse, but the skin around his eyes changed. "That compartment should have been removed last week," he said sharply, then froze as if hearing himself arrive too late. No one spoke. Ethan did not smile. He only looked at the sealed envelope and said, "I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here so the truth doesn't get buried twice." Eleanor stepped forward at last, her voice steady enough to quiet even the rain. "Then we open it in front of everyone." Richard reached out. "Mrs. Whitmore, I advise against—" "No," she said. "You advised enough." Pastor Avery placed the sealed envelope beneath the chandelier light, and every eye in the church fixed on the cracked wax as Eleanor called for an independent notary to come to the piano. The notary broke the wax seal beneath the chandelier light, and the sound was so small that everyone heard it. A dry crack, a breath-catching, paper unfolding after years in the dark. Eleanor Whitmore stood with one hand on the piano, her wedding ring pressed against the walnut Ethan had just repaired, while the notary adjusted his glasses and read the first line aloud. Supplement B to the last will and testament of Samuel Whitmore. Richard Hale's pen slipped from his fingers and struck the floor once. No one bent to pick it up. Daniel Mercer stared at the envelope as if the paper had betrayed him personally. The notary continued, voice steady but slower now, because even legal words can become sacred when they carry a dead man's protection. If the sanctuary piano remains on church property and continues to serve the community, the Whitmore Preservation Fund shall activate for the maintenance, debt relief, meal ministry, and music education of Grace Hollow Church for a period of 50 years. The room did not cheer. It went quiet in a way applause could never honor. The fluorescent hum from the side hallway grew loud. Rain tapped the stained glass like fingertips. Lily reached for Ethan's hand, and this time he let her hold it. Eleanor closed her eyes, not collapsing, not breaking the way she had when the song first rose from the keys, but standing straighter with every word as if Samuel's voice had finally found its way through the walls. Pastor Avery covered his mouth. A woman from the finance committee sat down slowly, the metal chair legs making one careful scrape against the floor. Richard cleared his throat. There may be procedural questions regarding— Read the attachment, Eleanor said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the finality of a door closing. The notary unfolded the second sheet. The ink was faded but intact. Samuel Whitmore's private letter named concerns that pressure might be placed on his wife during grief, that church property could be sold under the language of stewardship, and that any attempt to remove the piano before public review should trigger independent examination. Daniel's face lost color in careful inches. Richard looked toward the livestream tablet, then away from it too quickly. The notary reached the final clause. Before public activation of the fund, the enclosed composition for Eleanor, When the Church Forgets, shall be played once in the sanctuary where it was hidden, not as performance but as witness. Everyone turned toward Ethan. He did not move at first. He looked at Eleanor, waiting for permission because grief is not an instrument someone else gets to play without consent. Eleanor nodded once, tears shining but no longer ruling her. Ethan sat at the bench. His dusty hands hovered above the repaired keys. He played softly, almost humbly, letting the melody rise just enough to fill the room and no more. 3 bars became a promise. Promise became proof. Daniel lowered his eyes. Richard said nothing. Eleanor placed her palm flat on the piano and whispered, "My husband didn't hide money. In this piano. He hid protection." That was when the room truly went silent. Not embarrassed silent. Not confused silent. Convicted silent. Every smirk, every whisper, every polished explanation fell away, and all that remained was a carpenter in an old flannel shirt, his little girl beside him, and a song that had waited years for honest hands. Ethan finished the final note and stood before anyone could applaud. He closed the key cover gently, as if tucking the truth back into safety, and looked at Lily first, not the board, not the donors, not the men who had tried to blame him. The sale was suspended before the last vibration left the wood. Daniel Mercer was ordered to step away from church records pending review. Richard Hale was told, in front of the camera he had feared, that the estate file would be reopened independently. Justice had entered the sanctuary without raising its voice, but healing had not finished its work, and Ethan Brooks now had to decide what kind of man he would be when the room that doubted him finally saw him clearly. The crowd did not leave Grace Hollow Church with applause. They left softly, one row at a time, as if loud footsteps might bruise what had just been restored. Pastor Avery collected the evidence with the notary, each item placed into a labeled folder. The sleeved music, the green velvet strip, the opened envelope, Samuel Whitmore's letter, the livestream copy, the maintenance ledger from 1998. Daniel Mercer surrendered his church keys without a scene, his clipboard tucked under one arm like a shield that no longer worked. Richard Hale stood near the side door making a quiet call, but Eleanor Whitmore had already requested an independent estate review, and for the first time all day, the rules belonged to the truth. Ethan Brooks stayed behind only long enough to put the piano bench back where it belonged. Lily stood beside him, both hands wrapped around the soft cloth she had used to clean the keys. "Did we save the church, Daddy?" she asked. Ethan looked toward the sanctuary, where Pastor Avery was still staring at the roof as if he could finally imagine repairing it. "No, sweetheart," he said gently. "The truth did. We just didn't let it get thrown away." Eleanor heard him. She came forward slowly, no longer the silent widow in the back pew, but not a queen either. Just a woman carrying grief with straighter shoulders. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "my husband trusted this church with his last protection. Today, you protected it better than the people who knew its value." Ethan lowered his eyes, uncomfortable with praise. "I only came to fix a piano. That is why I trust you." A week later, the sale was formally suspended. Daniel was removed pending investigation, and Richard Hale's handling of the estate was reported to the State Bar and Probate Court. The Whitmore Preservation Fund paid the church debt, repaired the roof, kept the Sunday meal kitchen open, and created a small music room where children could learn without cost. Ethan did not accept a grand reward in front of cameras. He accepted a fair contract to restore the church's woodwork, the fellowship hall, and every bench scarred by years of use. His toolbox, once judged as the mark of a poor man, now sat by the piano like something honorable. Lily helped place the framed sheet music beside the instrument, her small fingers smoothing the label Pastor Avery had written. "Found by kindness. Protected by truth." Eleanor stood nearby, looking at the yellowed notes without breaking. Healing had not erased Samuel's absence. It had simply given his love a place to keep speaking. On the first Sunday after the fund opened, the sanctuary filled with the smell of soup from the basement kitchen and rain drying off children's coats. Ethan stood near the back wall, quiet as ever, while Lily sat with the other kids, her feet swinging above the floor. Eleanor played the first 3 notes herself, slowly, imperfectly, smiling through tears when the old piano answered. No one clapped at first. They only listened. This time the silence was not shock, not shame, not fear. It was respect. And in that golden hush, Ethan Brooks understood that some things are not saved because they are valuable. They become valuable because someone chooses to save them with dignity.